I have to start this video off by apologizing for my absence over the last number of months. I was working on the biggest project of my YouTube career only to see it copyright claimed into oblivion. The video I'm talking about is a 2-hour-long analysis of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, a research project I have at this point been working on since October 2023 and which represents the most effort I have ever put into a single video. Months of research, scripting, and editing only to see Warner Bros. Refuse to acknowledge the project for what it is. Fair use. My video did not and does not intend to replace the original product and is clearly transformative by virtue of my commentary, the third-party research I included, and the analysis of the film in general. This obviously doesn't matter to them since, of the 2-hour video I've produced, this is how much content they've claimed and expect me to trim out. But since that's bleeding insanity, I will not comply. After the first attempt at publication, I've had to re-edit, re-render, and re-upload the video 8 times. And never before in all my years on YouTube has a copyright dispute been so frustrating. I have disputed the claim each and every time only to have it rejected, meaning that my next logical option is to appeal the dispute. But that would mean risking a channel strike, if they continue to abuse the copyright system, and that would leave me unable to upload videos or earn ad revenue for the next 3 months. I'm not willing to risk that, so I've been reluctantly playing ball and trying new methods of editing to make the video even more transformative in the hopes that I'll eventually be able to publish it. Although, the time it's taken me to re-edit that project has taken away from time I'd rather spend moving forward and working on new projects. So, suffice it to say, The Shining Explained is suspended indefinitely. That's not the only project I was working on over the last few months though. Sequelitis, Sicario, and a few more video game reviews are also in the pipeline, so stay tuned for those. And I know a lot of you were eager to see my review of Invincible Season 3, so rest assured, it is on the way. It's taking as long as it is because I want to make sure I'm covering all my bases and stealing my criticisms against the fanboys who will inevitably come to the show's defense. As for whether I'm leaning positive or negative on it, you'll just have to wait and see. For the time being, it's been too long since I made a video responding to your comments, and I've got some good ones saved for you today. So, without further ado...
There are 2 different types of dick pics.
In early 2024, I published a video covering the radical differences between depictions of courtship and romance in 2 very disparate pieces of media. 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, a musical comedy from 1954, and Euphoria, a dramatic tone piece from 2019. To be clear, I am fully aware of just how different these works are, and that's why I chose them, to illustrate the symbiotic relationship between artistic depictions of romance and real-world perceptions of sex and dating. Long story short, back in the day, the messages undergirding stories were optimistic and aspirational, encouraging viewers to see the best in others, motivate our loved ones to be better versions of themselves, and take accountability for our actions. The values at the core of modern fiction, alternatively, instill in us a sense of societal paranoia and anxiety, leading us to question our place in the world and ask if we're worthy of love or if we should even have been born. Old movies told us to marry young, have tons of babies, and sing happily together till the cows come home. Modern movies tell us that degrading ourselves through frivolous sexual encounters is enriching, and that the traditions to which our parents and grandparents held fast are outdated, misogynistic, and unscientific. Of course, I'm generalizing, but that was the whole point of the video, to voice my grievances with modern storytelling since that lack of optimistic characters and narratives in the mainstream will necessarily have an impact on the broader culture. But you can go watch the full video if you're interested. We're here now to address some pushback I got in the comments. Matthias says, "You said that art is a major influence on how a society views the themes being depicted, in that instance romance. And that is where I fundamentally disagree, because what you call propaganda now is the exact same thing in 7 Brides, but since you seem to agree with the message of the film, or at least of the romance being depicted in it, I think you either fail to see or prefer to ignore the same propaganda that it feeds you. This is a reasonable objection to a double standard I do not hold. If you watch far enough in the video, I do address the idea that all art can be regarded as propaganda, since all art has the capacity to influence our perspectives on and experiences of life, and all people have the capacity to be convinced of ideas to which they otherwise wouldn't have been exposed through art. The idea that all art is propaganda is not actually one with which I agree. The reason I brought it up was to preemptively counter anyone who unfairly labeled 7 Brides as patriarchal heteronormative propaganda. since if we were to apply the same measuring stick to Euphoria, it could be categorized as dysfunctional, depressive, antinatalist social justice propaganda. I don't believe either works are propaganda in the truest sense of the word, but they are, in their own ways, captivating and convincing works of fiction, which, historically speaking, exist in order to leave viewers with something to think about long after they've consumed them. These works of art exist in order to not only comment on existing social conventions and customs, but to challenge our preconceived notions about life and sometimes even change our minds. The easiest example I can give of this would be The Lion King. If you came away from The Lion King believing that death is not a natural part of life and something that you can deny or successfully subvert, then you watched the movie wrong. The Lion King tells us that the circle of life includes the highest highs and the lowest lows and encourages us to accept that reality in order to mature and self-actualize. That doesn't mean The Lion King is propaganda. It's just a work of art with a strong core message. My intention when comparing Seven Brides to Euphoria was simply to point out how the themes at the center of those works have meaningful correlations to real-world ideas and behaviors. The 1950s was a bright and hopeful decade, and it produced a lighthearted and inspirational musical comedy. Today's youths, however, are more suicidal and atomized than ever before, owed to a combination of the sexual revolution, technological advancements, and moral decay, especially with regards to relationship dynamics. Back to Matthias, he says, Seven Brides conveys a different way to court women and how men/women relationships worked. The themes of consent, equal responsibility in house chores, respect, gender roles, are all very dated. They adhere to a very old-fashioned way of seeing heterosexual relationships and feel fresh because they make it seem like it was heaven. But, like the bleakness of Euphoria, it doesn't show how housewives of the 50s to 60s were all on antidepressants because they were deeply unhappy with their life and catered women to very specific tasks and attitudes that the feminist movement has shown to be deeply oppressive and unfulfilling for those under it. Now, for a man today, what seemed to be depicted in Seven Brides may seem appealing, but its very happy appearance may make it look, and is more insidious in its messages, and guides male behavior in harmful ways that our society has deemed outdated and generally harmful for both man and woman.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
I was charitable enough with the first half, but this comment is downright bullshit. The themes are all very dated. Yes, thank you for pointing out the obvious. You haven't explained why being dated is a problem, though. The criticism of dated ideas assumes that we, today, have a better understanding of morality than our forebears did. Because of the prevalence of depression and suicidality in this era, I beg to differ. I would argue that we've only moved further away from our natural inclinations and made human flourishing more of a challenge than it ever needed to be. They feel fresh because they make it seem like it was heaven. Nonsense. You clearly haven't watched Seven Brides, because if you did, then you would know that happiness did not come easily to them. They had to struggle through lack of socialization, competition in the dating marketplace, loyalty to family versus maturity and composure, and the gender divide which is integral to courtship in the first place. It wasn't heaven for them. It was hard work. But it was worth it in the end. Heaven is what Rue experiences in her drug-addled state before collapsing back to Earth and never learning her lesson. It doesn't show how housewives of the 50s to 60s were all on antidepressants because they were deeply unhappy with their life. Receipts. Now. How did you come to the conclusion that all those women were on antidepressants? Who are you to claim, in a sweeping statement, that they led oppressed and unfulfilled lives? The feminist movement told you so? You mean the movement that is based on the fundamental lie that the genders are equal? Said movement hasn't accomplished anything besides upsetting the natural balance between men and women to the point that both parties are especially demoralized today. Seven Brides is more insidious in its messages and guides male behavior in harmful ways. Seven Brides depicts the immature brothers kidnapping the girls they are interested in and bringing them back to their farm for the winter, where Millie, being justifiably shocked at this development, forces them to sleep in the barn until the ice thaws and the girls' fathers can retrieve them. Adam, the eldest brother and leader of the family, tells them that it's their responsibility to give the girls up if they want any chance of keeping them at all, since, over the cold and lonely months, they've all grown quite fond of one another. Euphoria gives viewers a tutorial on how to fake a urine test. I am not kidding. Rue, the main character and narrator, goes into detail explaining how she fakes the urine tests her mother gives her so that she can get away with fiending more fentanyl. If that isn't insidious or harmful, then I don't know what is. The commenter admits, however, that they haven't watched Euphoria, so at best, we can say they're commenting on the situation from a position of ignorance, which, considering all the scrutiny they provide of Seven Brides, comes off as particularly silly. Seven Brides portrays men behaving in irresponsible but totally understandable ways and then sees them taking responsibility for their mistakes. Seven Brides illustrates how men and women's differences lead them to bond and grow out of the juvenile ideas they held onto while they were single. Euphoria treats men like predators and women like sex toys. Euphoria illustrates how foolish it would be for you to put your trust in your romantic partner because neither of you are mature or selfless enough to realize that not all problems can be solved with introspection and distraction. Men and women are not interchangeable. They are different, and therein complementary. Seven Brides reinforces the timeless notion that marriage makes us better if we allow it to, while Euphoria revels in the sleaze and anxiety of the modern dating landscape, itself corrupted by drug abuse, social media, and widespread distrust. If you're interested in more on the topic, you can go check out the original video. To this day, easily one of my best, especially for how short it is. In it, I give more specific examples, and if you just pay attention to what I say, the arguments stand on their own 2 feet. Anyway, I've had enough of this now. Just thinking about Euphoria makes me feel dirty.
Help me, Talos, because I am useless without you.
The next comment comes from my review of Secret Invasion, not the Marvel comic but the Disney Plus show. And that clarification should be enough to inform my criticism, but here's a summary of what you need to know. Secret Invasion is a 6-episode-long struggle session in which Nick Fury, former director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and founder of the Avengers, has his balls put in a vice while people he's known for decades berate him for problems he caused and mistakes he made, of which we, the audience, have no knowledge. This is because Secret Invasion invents these character flaws and insists to us that Fury is guilty as sin despite all the good he's done in safeguarding the planet. It is a character study in the same way Hiroshima was a diplomatic visit. And an integral part of the show was what to do with the Skrulls, an alien race of shapeshifting goblins who began their time on Earth helping Fury, acting as his spy network, giving him access to information and influence he could not possibly have had otherwise. Over the years, however, they began inviting more and more Skrulls from the far reaches of space in order to covertly colonize Earth and finally have a place to call home away from the tyranny of another alien race called the Kree. What started out as a 20-man intelligence operation turned into a full-blown infestation as hundreds of thousands of Skrulls were smuggled into society right under Fury's nose. He was kind enough to offer a few Skrulls refuge back in the 90s, only for them to take advantage of his hospitality by facilitating the titular Secret Invasion. An invasion which, unbeknown to even Talos, the leader of the Skrulls, brought with it Skrull supremacists who saw fit to wage war on humanity through political subversion, intimidation, and extreme violence. The President of the United States is a key figure in this plot as Rhodey, yes, Colonel James Rhodes, is and has been a Skrull for years and has managed to worm his way into the White House, serving as an advisor to the President himself. This season documents Fury's attempts to curb the rising Skrull threat while, at the same time, arguing that Skrulls have the same capacity for fellowship, compassion, and cooperation that humans do. And despite all the evidence to the contrary, the final episode frames the President as a nasty bad man for vowing to exterminate Skrulls wherever they are found. Secret Invasion, as a story, is desperate to endear the audience to the Skrulls, while portraying how underhanded their behavior is and how dangerous their very presence on the world stage is. If you watch this shit with your brain on standby, the only logical conclusion you could come to is that Skrulls pose an existential threat to humanity, but that we should allow them to live among us anyway, because the main characters consider it a moral affront to hold any degree of prejudice against them. And prejudice, my brothers in the Imperium, is precisely what these goblins have earned. For lying to their caretakers, subverting international diplomatic relations, bombing civilians, stealing all of the Avengers' powers, yes, that is the thing that happened in this show, and still having the audacity to claim that they are the innocent victims of interstellar oppression. This brings us to Krastanos' comment. I didn't like Secret Invasion and neither the wokeness of the MCU, but that doesn't make you any less of a fascist. My dude dropped the F-bomb because of how I reviewed a TV show. Surely you'd think he would back up that claim, right? No. Instead, he just went on a rhetorical rampage, conflating fascism with conservatism and authoritarianism, and re-editing his comments several times over because, let's be honest, defending the Skrulls in any capacity necessitates some mental gymnastics. The only way I have access to his original comment is through the notification feed on YouTube, which is why his comment looks like this here. The comment that is currently pinned on the actual video is not what he originally wrote, and since our back and forth, he has deleted and edited even more. So, for documentation's sake, here is the exchange I was able to screenshot before he deleted or edited significant portions, and it went about as well as you'd expect from a bug poster. My argument is simple. The Skrulls are a hostile alien race, and we, humans, have good reason to get rid of them, in whatever form that takes. The commenter appears to believe that since they are sentient, capital punishment would either be excessive or morally unjustifiable, and mass deportations would suffice. Although, I don't know if he still believes that, since some of the comments in which he outlined his perspective are now gone. Our disagreement there is about as deep as it can get. He extends the content of humanity to alien shapeshifters, and I do not. He regards the Skrulls as somehow equal to humans, whether ethically or in the eyes of the law, and I do not. But, to be clear, that's not at all my issue with his comment. Sure, I think it's dumb to treat shapeshifting aliens as worthy of human empathy, but I'm more than willing to hear out arguments for that case, since we are, ultimately, having a debate about a work of fiction. My issue is that he, in his first comment, called me a fascist and did none of the legwork to explain how he arrived at that conclusion. He added tons of fluff to his comments and used the terms conservative and authoritarian interchangeably with fascist, but did not get us anywhere closer to an understanding of his original critique. By all means, dude, call me bad names in my comment section. That's what it's there for. But if you're given so many opportunities to clarify your criticism, and you, instead, take those opportunities to pander to people who already agree with you and reaffirm your own devotion to some vague pop culture political sect, then you only have yourself to blame for getting clowned on. I just asked him to show his math, and he responded with tribal politics, Antifa, habeas corpus, moralizing, and essentially saying nothing. It would be far less disingenuous of me to accuse him of bug posting than it was of him to accuse me of fascism. It makes you wonder if these people even know what they're saying when they breach 3-syllable words. But anyway, go check out Secret Cringevasion. Skrulls were not made in the image of God, and we're moving right along.
Brad?
Bradley.
Brad, what's wrong with you?
It's Bradley.
Brad.
Bradley.
Bradley.
Out of the wishy-washy frying pan and into the bad faith fire. This comment is currently pinned on my analysis of Brawl in Cell Block 99, easily one of my all-time favorites, and a video I'm especially proud of since I haven't seen anyone do a breakdown of the film in as much depth as I went into, and I didn't even cover everything there is to praise about it. If you're interested, go watch that video before I spoil the movie for you here. Believe me, it is worth the watch, provided you have the stomach for it. Cell Block 99 is a rather dark film. Its scenes are tense, carefully written, and contribute to a brutally bittersweet ending. But, besides the more shocking events of the plot, it really is just a character study about an especially stoic, especially uncompromising man named Bradley Thomas. The way characters bounce off one another and fill out their roles in this grim world lends the film a great degree of believability and earns your investment. It's the side characters, more than anything, that make this movie feel real. As though, even though what we're witnessing is highly improbable, we're not just seeing characters written for this story, manufactured to play second fiddle to Bradley, but authentic people with whom Bradley incidentally interacts. It's this plausibility and focus on internal consistency that won me over from the first time I saw it, and it's the overall quality of the story that has me wondering how someone could come to a conclusion like this. Meh. Like all of Zoller's films, masturbatory right-wing dog whistling. I responded to this comment with the same thing I always ask of such reckless and vague comments. Give one example. That's all I wanted. One example of the accusation he's laying at the feet of the very talented writer-director S. Craig Zoller, who not only did Cell Block 99, but also Bone Tomahawk and Dragged Across Concrete. All of which, being movies, you should absolutely watch. At least once. They're certainly not for everyone, but within their respective niches, they are decisively well-crafted works of art. And so I'm left to wonder, what about these films constitutes right-wing dog whistling? For those who don't know, left-wing ideology is what we're typically exposed to through the themes, casting choices, and language in Hollywood movies and TV, conditioning us to associate those values with what is normal, acceptable, and therefore good. And right-wing ideology is damn near everything else, relegating all that is fringe, distasteful, and evil for the people who don't align with left-wing values. If this all seems too abstract or academic for you, then worry not, it's mostly nonsense. The right and left are terms borrowed from the French Revolution, where the people who sat on the right of the assembly supported the king's absolute right to rule, and those on the left were campaigning to limit his authority in favor of a republic. Right-wing and left-wing now not only do not retain the meaning they had at their conception, but have become diluted to the point that they more closely resemble esoteric lore than anything concretely political. Right and left are not just generalizations. They're worse than that because of how carelessly people throw them around. Right and left are teams in an ongoing political theater production. They are tribal identifiers on the world stage, where the characters are heads of state, the themes are costing people their lives, and the plot changes on a revolving 24-hour cycle. The establishment, meaning news and entertainment, academia and the sciences, and political institutions, have, for decades now, trended to the left in terms of thought and policy. This explains the obvious bias in media, studies, and headlines to revere ideas of equality and empiricism, whereas the average person, especially as they get older, trends to the right in their thoughts and behaviors, valuing lower taxes, family, and faith. These labels exist because they once served a purpose: categorization. They helped us define and sort ideas into neat little boxes, which, in turn, helped us orient ourselves in the world. Today, however, it is simply not important that you understand what is a right-wing policy versus a left-wing policy. Today, what matters most is where your allegiance lies, what team you're rooting for in the culture war. And dog whistling, also for those who don't know, alludes to the idea of covert messages and philosophies being transmitted through otherwise innocuous speech. Just as people cannot hear the sound of a dog's whistle, so too can the uninitiated not grasp the pernicious concepts underlying what seems to be inoffensive material. And so, although I press this commenter for examples of right-wing dog whistling in Zoller's films, implying that I don't know what he's talking about, I've lived on the internet for over a decade now. Sadly, I know exactly what he means because trotting out phrases like right-wing dog whistling at all is indicative of a whole network of beliefs intended to muscle themselves in between product and consumer. The fact that this commenter validates the idea of right-wing dog whistling at all means that we can assume with a high degree of certainty what his peripheral positions are. And since he never gave any examples, even though he clearly read the responses, that is precisely what I'm going to do. Starting with Bone Tomahawk, it's a traditionally masculine story with a Western setting. The men act like men, taking responsibility for their wives and going to great lengths to keep them safe. There are no instances of women upstaging men in their heroics or even coming close, flagrantly defying the leftist standard of gender equality. The movie does not affirm or even entertain leftist doctrine and is therefore right-wing. On to Dragged Across Concrete. The story follows masculine police officers who harbor racial biases and portrays, without ever glorifying or rationalizing their characters, how those racial biases can do more harm than good. The movie features white men who say the N-word in the leading roles and allows you to draw your own conclusions about them, thereby respecting the audience's intelligence and implicitly making it right-wing. And then there's Cell Block 99, a story about a masculine man who ends up in prison after creating a new life for himself and his wife. But when his wife and unborn child are threatened, he is forced to descend the prison industrial complex, attacking guards and suffering increasing levels of abuse as he goes, only to learn that he's been tricked and will never see them again. Bradley Thomas endures ridiculous hardships not only for his wife but for the baby inside her, a concept completely alien to leftist writers. One of the villains is an abortionist, said to be able to mutilate the baby but keep it alive inside the womb, framing abortion in a negative light, automatically precluding the movie from Academy Award nominations. And Bradley is a devout Christian, invoking Jesus' name when making promises and brandishing that iconic cross on his head, implying to leftists that he is adjacent to white supremacists and thus a morally reprehensible human. Now, if you just watch the movie and pay attention, Bradley obviously has a dark past which he wishes he could leave behind. He obviously isn't racist, but does use racism in order to escalate tensions in prison. He obviously is a Christian, but there is no implication of prejudice or extreme political views. He's a tragic hero with a compelling reason to do the horrible things he does in the film. And, just a reminder, he also abhors violence.
You rather make desks and parts of vending machines?
I'd rather knit baby booties with pink yarn than hit people for no reason.
He's just a man forced into a corner, trying desperately to fight his way out. As with all of Zoller's films, Cell Block 99 explores facets of human nature that Hollywood doesn't care to touch with a 10-foot pole, and so of course their themes would seem unappetizing. When you've been conditioned to see men and women as indistinct material drones, to treat intolerance as a cardinal sin, and to roll over so that other people can solve your problems for you, then of course Zoller's brand of masculine, independent, traditional, and unfiltered storytelling will feel wrong to you. But that's an environmental problem, not an artistic or moral one. Ask yourself, is it truly right-wing how Bradley exercises his faith, or is it just one pillar of his character which gets to shine in this story? Is it truly right-wing that the villains have an abortionist on staff, or is it just unambiguously evil to vivisect a baby while it's still in the womb? Is it truly right-wing that Bradley is a strong, stoic, tall white man, or is that just a plausible set of traits for his character? To be clear, I don't think that Zoller's films are not right-wing. They definitely embrace traditional ideas that mainstream storytelling would sooner quarantine and suppress, but is that not what we would expect of a film produced and released in a country with free speech? Surely there is room for all sorts of ideas, no matter how fringe or unorthodox, to be explored through art. The fact that someone could so casually consider Zoller's work to be masturbatory right-wing dog whistling goes to show just how narrow the Overton window has become. Characters ranting about climate change, scolding one another over microaggressions, and deconstructing the gender divide have become so commonplace that people in the real world have simply accepted those sentiments as normal and true. And so, accusing a piece of art, or the artist, of right-wing dog whistling is more so an indictment of their ideological purity than it is a critique of the work itself. You hold the wrong ideas and thought you could get away with embedding them into your fiction, but I caught you and will now expose you to the rest of the world for your heresy. These people are part of a cult, whether they realize it or not. A cult which rejects human nature, aims to subvert traditional institutions, and has no concept of coherent storytelling. So, naturally, they would detest Brawl in Cell Block 99 because it's just a damn good movie.
At least have the spider to keep me company. Is that what you...
In late 2022, I published a review on the film Watcher, which I will not go into too much detail on now, so if you'd like to get caught up, you can go watch that and come back when you're done. Long story short, I loved the movie and hated the ending. The movie is about an American woman named Julia, who moves to Romania with her husband Francis, where he speaks the language but she does not. He is preoccupied with work, and she has nothing better to do than dread that a local serial killer might be stalking her. And he does not believe her despite her desperate pleas and the evidence staring him in the face. This leads to an ending where Julia inexplicably survives having her throat slit, only to pull out a literal Chekhov's gun and shoot the serial killer, culminating in a glare of severe resentment towards her dopey husband. Knowing that I was dealing with potentially sensitive subject matter, women being stalked and having their concerns dismissed, I made sure to include a tangent in the video where I said, to step outside the story for a moment, this situation is all too familiar for women across the planet. Feeling unsafe and preyed upon and cast aside are all symptoms of a savage, unforgiving world. One in which evil and brute force have just as good a chance as compassion and justice, and where women and children are consistently the victims of these malevolent acts. That is not where I take issue with Watcher. And I really thought that, along with the content of the rest of the video, would suffice in expressing my empathy towards women in the real world who can relate to Julia's situation. But this is the internet, so of course it fucking didn't. I saw Watcher for the first time today. The further we get into this comment, the clearer it will become how impulsively written it was. I am so genuinely mind-boggled by this criticism. First of all, it's convoluted as fuck, and I can barely make sense of your argument. It's not convoluted at all. It's 11 minutes long, and I made my argument very easy to understand. You, Heather, oh of course her name is Heather, you just liked the movie and didn't like the idea of it receiving any negative criticism, no matter how well founded. But I think it's that the film and its characters lose their authenticity or realism because, in your opinion, the ending serves as a cheap gotcha? Spoken like a man. Why thank you, and yes, by the way, you got the gist of it. My case really isn't convoluted at all. You were able to sum it up in a single sentence. So, what's the rest of this comment for? Firstly, cisgender is not a real category of human. They don't exist. There are people who are happy with what's between their legs, and people who are not. As soon as you hear ideologically driven language like this, you know it's time to bail. These people are conversational landmines, and they're really not worth hearing out, but this gets funnier, so we're going to entertain Heather's rambling anyway. Her survival does not cheapen any of the above. Are you sure about that, Heather? Because the entire plot leads towards a tragedy in the final minutes of the film, where Julia has her carotid artery cut, bleeds over half the room, and lays motionless for a few minutes, only to miraculously stand up and take revenge on her would-be killer with a gun and her negligent husband with an expression of unbridled scorn. I would say that cheapens the grounded and realistic nature of everything that came before. I know I've used this analogy in the past, but it really is akin to Jack climbing out of the water with Rose's necklace at the end of Titanic so that their soggy, wrinkled bodies can have one final embrace before the credits roll. It's absurd and necessarily compromises the verisimilitude of what built up to that conclusion. You're not a woman who has had to report sexual violence or stalking to the police, are you? The arrogance of this sentence is astonishing. Who are you to assume my gender? The cut on her neck? When I saw it, I immediately thought it was a warning. It didn't look, to me, like he intended to kill her. I was surprised when she died. That's your problem, Heather. If your suspension of disbelief allows you to, in such a grounded story, believe that having your neck ventilated and pints of blood leak out is not a lethal blow, then maybe you should sit with and interrogate yourself as to why your comprehension of human anatomy is so detached from reality. Also, relax, Heather reads like the exact type of woman who would flip her shit if you told her to relax, but has no problem talking down to other people that way. It really seems like you could only be sympathetic to her if she died. Why is that, do you think? Because it's not a good look. Heather, you don't have a clue, and you really should have watched the video more than once before typing this out because it's clear that this comment is fueled by an emotional attachment to the movie more so than a measured grievance with my criticism of it. This is an extremely bad faith take because she confuses my criticism of the internal consistency of the story with a lack of sympathy for Julia's personal experiences. And that is just retarded. I outlined quite clearly in the video how sympathetic of a character she is. That is, in fact, my whole issue with her husband Francis, that he doesn't take her seriously despite the preponderance of evidence. My criticism was not that Julia's suffering was only truly tragic if she died. My criticism was that the ending retroactively makes her suffering artificial to achieve a cheap gotcha moment, thereby sacrificing the film's believability. Heather, you summed up my take earlier in your comment. How did you forget that so quickly? Personally, I loved this movie. I found it absolutely terrifying. I really related to Julia's experience with her husband and the police. Golly gee, if only I had inserted a tangent where I tried to appeal to women just like you. This situation is all too familiar for women across the planet. I would have absolutely hated this film if she died, as if the world needs more misogynistic trauma porn. We don't. Way to bury the lead, Heather. We could have skipped over all the bad faith argumentation if you just admitted that you personally have a bias towards stories that prop women up at the expense of realism. The real horror is that her stalking and assault could have been prevented if the men in her life listened to her. That is what makes this film so terrifying. That is horror. I actually agree with this part, Heather. Where we disagree is that Julia's being neglected was clearly leading to her tragic death at the end, and instead of that, we get the nonsensical survival and stupid stink eye that undermines the gripping writing preceding it. Let women fucking survive. Let women have their I told you so. If it's well written, then I'll stand right there with you in showering the story with praise. The problem with Watcher is that it is clearly constructed in such a way as to deliver a fantastical payoff at the end, in spite of the realistic foundation that was laid beforehand. Sarah Connor survived her abuse in T2, and I love that movie. The Bride survived her tragic ordeal in Kill Bill, and that's my favorite Tarantino film. Do those not count because I happen to step on your toes in this regard? And the real kicker, I legitimately think you need to sit with and interrogate why her survival and her resentment towards Francis' I told you so moment makes you so incredibly uncomfortable. This is peak projection. Heather, it's not that the end of the film makes me uncomfortable. It's that I was disappointed by the flagrant rejection of the tone and stakes that were so carefully crafted throughout the rest of the film. Judging by this comment alone, it's obvious that you strongly identify with Julia and are made extremely uncomfortable by the idea of a more realistic conclusion because of how you would perceive that to inform your own experiences. Feminists will tell you to sit down and interrogate yourself about everything from ghastly crimes to hurt feelings because they only understand problem solving through the lens of self-reflection and introspection. They are ruled by their emotions and have no clue what it means to make an impartial, unbiased assessment. The ideology that insists that women be independent and empowered has only succeeded at making them narcissistic and delusional. But at the end of the day, this is just a movie, and her comment is how should I put this? Spoken like a woman. If you want a movie that sincerely comments on how real women are really suffering in the real world while telling a coherent story, then go watch Wind River.
I think I miss my wife.
Oh boy, did some people react to my last Invincible video. Blood was shed in that comment section. Accusations were levied and bold claims were made, with little in the way of substantiation. One of the funniest things I heard must have been that I refuse to acknowledge any criticism made against me, that I ignore and dismiss arguments in spite of my love of discussion and debate, that I simply will not admit when I'm wrong. It's not hard to see how some viewers might get that impression, especially based on my interactions in the comments, but I can assure you I do accept criticism, on the condition that it is valid criticism. Do I have any evidence of this? Well, actually, yes. It's the video itself. This 36-minute review of Invincible Season 2 is all the proof I need. You see, the reason I find the charge that I can't take scrutiny so funny is because this video is itself the corrected version of the original. The first version I uploaded contained a full minute of me remarking on Anissa's scenes, based entirely on an out-of-context spoiler I heard years ago. It was wrong of me to even speculate on something that did not take place within the confines of the show, since I haven't read the comics in the first place. We'll come back to that, don't worry. Within 2 days, the commenters on that first version of the video were quick to point out how I was basing my take on something that was still to happen, even in the continuity of the show. And so, I deleted that video, re-edited and uploaded the new version, and here we are, with most of you having no idea what I'm talking about or if this is even true because that original video no longer exists. Point being, I made a categorical mistake, was corrected by the people in the comments, and changed the final product accordingly. I took that criticism on its face because I care, not only about making entertaining and engaging video essays, but because there was no argument I could pose to justify that error in my script. And the reason I'm prefacing this section like this is to assure you that I do respond to valid criticism of my work, and the argument that I should have read the comics before making these videos does not fit that definition. I've been going back and forth with Invincible fans in the comments for months now, with a massive amount of them taking issue with the fact that I deconstruct elements of the season's writing, despite those elements having been faithfully adapted from the comics. These humans have a tenuous comprehension of the English language and ostensibly no rationale as to why I should hold the source material as more relevant to my analysis than I do. None of them can give a reason as to why I should keep the comics in mind when criticizing the show besides, because the show is literally based off the comics, what do you mean? If I were to praise something that was accurately adapted from the comics, you can bet your bottom dollar no one would be in the comments saying, "Bro, that's just how it was in the comics, no need to glaze them just for being faithful." It is only when you can point out a flaw in the structure of the story that zealots will jump to the show's defense, using the source material as a shield from criticism, and thereby stripping the show of its independence and unique merits. Remember the Guardians fighting the Maulers at the White House? Remember the old lady Mark tried to save from the Flaxons? Remember how defensive Nolan got about his damaged suit and Debbie's subsequent investigation into it? How about the scene where Nolan and Mark fight over the jet pilots? There's no way you've forgotten the train scene. Well, what do they matter? They weren't in the comics. They are inventions of the show. Our holy book, our sacred text, didn't even introduce Cecil until after Mark got thrashed by his dad. All those epic Cecil scenes from Season 1 are not in the comics. What does this tell us? That the show has violated some venerated boundary? That the show is now lesser for not being completely faithful to the source material? Or does it tell us that the show is an adaptation, drawing largely from the comics but expanding, enriching, and improving on the blueprint that was laid out there? If so, then how exactly would reading the comics help me understand the show better? Why should I need to do homework in order to not just enjoy but fully appreciate the show? Why should third-party material play any role in my analysis of a work of art? I'll tell you why. I absolutely should have read the comics if it was my intention to draw comparisons between the two stories, which is not my goal, clear to see if you just watch the videos, and is precisely why I edited out that minute-long section about Anissa, in which I drew fallacious parallels to events in the comics which I have not read. I enjoy the show for what it is. Cool superheroes, supported by excellent voice acting, participating in a thrilling narrative. And, for whatever reason, some commenters just won't let that stand. It's not lazy, it's just how it was written. The prime example of someone with no standards. Merely by virtue of it happening the same way in the source material, the show is not guilty of poor writing. No, that's not how it works. If the scene and all its components are the same in both the show and the comic, what that means is that they are both flawed. Lazy? It's almost as loyal to the comics as they could make it. Okay, but why does that matter? If loyalty to the source material was actually a standard to which we held fast in judging an adaptation's quality, then Captain America Civil War would be trash, when it is, in fact, better than the comic from which it is adapted, but that's a discussion for another time. This guy is slow and did not absolutely did not read the comics. Dude's got a Deadpool and Wolverine profile pic, so he's obviously well-versed in coherent and internally consistent writing. So you're telling me this isn't a one-to-one adaptation of the comic? It's not. It literally isn't. I haven't even read the comics, and I know it's not. Just Lance and Corbin has 2 incredibly detailed videos on how and why the show is so different. They are excellent resources for anyone looking to compare the source material to the adaptation, which, again, has never been my intention. Did you know that the show was based on comic? Why, yes, I do. But when asked, why does it matter, fans have no answer. Their brains fry so easily. This guy attempted to answer, but actually just repeated himself. This is their circular logic, conditioned into them from years of MCU discussions. It's based on a comic, and merely by virtue of faithfully adapting a comic, it can do no wrong. This standard is not applied consistently, nor do they even understand why they hold it. You talk as if this story isn't already written in the comics, but yeah, there's holes in the plot. This is one of the most baffling comments, because my dude seems to simultaneously take issue with my not having read the comics, while acknowledging that the plots of either don't hold up under scrutiny. I would like to take this opportunity to say, if you have introduced your younger siblings, or cousins, or even your own children to my content, I appreciate it and I hope to have a positive influence on them. However, my videos are not for kids. Please, supervise your little ones before they start typing shit like this. They would have to change the story to something completely different. I admit that could be interesting, but that's not what the fans want. And I get accused of not doing my research. Once again, no, the show is not an accurate adaptation of the comics, but besides that, who's to say the fans want a one-to-one adaptation? The show has invented, fleshed out, and rearranged significant plot beats and been celebrated by fans of the comics the world over. And I know this because they're in my comments telling me how faithful the show is despite the evidence right in front of them. Obviously, the fans of the show are enjoying it regardless of the additions and changes because it is compelling enough to earn a certain degree of grace. My issue comes with the people dying on the hill that the show has somehow earned a free pass because it's based on a comic book at all. This would be a good review if the series wasn't part of an already made comic that has ended. There we go. Finally, someone gets it. Well, he doesn't actually, but he's come the closest. While I'm aware that this show is an adaptation of a pre-existing story, I'm reviewing it from the perspective of someone who has no knowledge of that prior work. I have deliberately chosen to avoid the comics because, 1, I started with the show and so have become attached to the incredible voice acting, and 2, any work of art should be able to stand on its own, independently of third-party information. The comic is the show's source material, yes, but it would be more accurate to regard it as the first iteration of the story, the 1.0. The rough draft, even. Since, unlike many other adaptations, the comic's writer is actively involved in the adaptation process. He is reworking and adjusting things as he sees fit, meaning that Invincible, the show, is a unique product, a separate work from the comic, to be judged on its own merits and criticized for its own shortcomings. I don't mean to take anyone's enjoyment away. I literally cannot brainwash you to change your opinion of the show. I simply do not have the power to deprive you of your love for this or any other work of art. My goal is to criticize Invincible for what it gets wrong, as well as praise it for what it does well. If, somewhere in that process, I make an argument or pose an idea that convinces you that Invincible is not as solidly written as you initially believed, it's still up to you how you react to that information. Some people will get butthurt and rage against me for making fair and valid criticism. Some people will accept the flaws and still be capable of enjoying the show. If you are easily convinced that your sacred cow stinks, that speaks more to your mindset than my criticism. If all it takes for you to change your mind about a show or comic book which you initially held in high regard is a YouTuber pointing out objective weaknesses in the story's structural integrity, then maybe it wasn't worth all that investment in the first place. The good news is that if we apply our critical mindsets to stories and they not only resist scrutiny, but actually make more sense, reveal more details worthy of admiration, and give us more reason to care, then we've just unlocked a method to get even more enjoyment out of the fiction we consume. It's called objective criticism, and that is precisely the mindset I'll be carrying into my review of Invincible Season 3. Stay tuned, and if you'd like to support my work, you can become a channel member or subscribe to my Patreon. As always, I love discussion and debate, so if you have any criticism of my responses to your comments, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time. The real horror is that her stalking and assault could have been prevented if the men in her life listened to her. That is what makes this film so terrifying. That is the horror. That is horror. Can you hear the Bokmakiri?